Welcome back to DC Wrap. I'm Pat Pobletti with WisPolitics.com, and joining me this week is Katherine Gehl, a business leader, speaker, political innovation activist who has published a number of works on reforming the political system to better serve its constituents. Katherine, thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Pat, I'm super happy to be talking to you today. I love talking about this stuff, and I love particularly having the chance to talk to people in Wisconsin.
So I want to start off by asking you to fill viewers who may not be familiar with you in on your background and kind of how you came to politics, because I think it's really instructive of how you've come to view our political system.
Yes, a great question. So I really have had a reasonably traditional career, mostly in business, which ended with 10 years running a food manufacturing company in Wisconsin. And I loved that company. I loved what we were up to. But at the same time, I was also, as a citizen, really involved in politics in pretty much the traditional way, which is you pick candidates and you think you should support them and help them get elected, and that would solve things. But as I was doing that, I really came up against the limits of that strategy, which is to say, I kept thinking that certain candidates would be able to change things in Washington, D.C. and solve our problem and take us to a new place and get rid of this gridlock and dysfunction. And it really never worked out that way. And eventually there was a meeting between my background in business and my frustration with politics. And I'll sort of summarize it by saying, at some point, it became clear to me this central question: why in my business and everybody's business do we have to make our customers happy in order for our businesses to do well and to grow? Why do we have to do our jobs well for our customers in order to keep our jobs? And yet in politics, our elected officials in Washington, D.C. don't seem to have to make the customers, the citizens, the public interest very happy in order to keep their jobs. And the politics industry, so that means not just the elected officials, but everybody involved in the business and politics, doesn't seem to have to solve the problems the political system should exist to solve in order to keep growing in power and revenue. And so for me, it just turned out to be a fundamental disconnect between the way most of us have to live our lives to be successful and the way things were working in politics. And then I brought that insight into this work in politics, which is a new way of looking at what's wrong, instead of thinking, oh, it's this party or these people or this politician. It's actually the system itself.
And that actually leads me perfectly to where I wanted to take this next, because that's the system that you described to me sounds like one that's broken. And I think at this point, I've had a conversation with each member of our congressional delegation about how Washington is in fact broken. But you actually make the opposite argument, that the dysfunction that we see is really a feature and not a bug, that the system is fixed, not broken. So can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's really a new way of looking at it, and the reason we need new ways of looking at it is because our current ways have never helped us solve it, right? So here's how I think about it. We always say Washington, D.C. is broken, Congress is broken, but it turns out that that's because we're making a fundamental flawed assumption. We're assuming that Washington and Congress is designed to serve the customers, to solve these national problems, to move the country forward. And it actually turns out that when we look at all the rules and the norms and the practices and the incentives that are driving behavior in Washington, D.C., they weren't really designed with problem solving in mind. They were designed by and for the people in that politics industry, how they can get power, how they can keep power, how they should divide the spoils of power. And when we look at it that way, we see, oh, this system's actually working great for them, the people in the business of politics is really thriving, even when the product that we're getting is bad. So then I turn it on its head, which is to say, no, Washington isn't broken. It's working perfectly for the people for whom it was designed. It's fixed for them. And then the question becomes, how do we change the design? How do we change the system so that it drives to working for us instead of working for the business of politics? And the good news is that once you look at it that way, it's not nearly as impossible to change as we might have assumed.
And you've actually come up with some solutions there, what you refer to as the election trifecta. And I want to go through each one of these with you. So let's start with the first one, which is non-partisan single ballot primaries. How does that kind of change some of the issues you just spoke about?
Pat, actually, I have narrowed the solution set to two. I don't have the election trifecta anymore, so I'll focus on the two. This comes again from business strategies about choosing what not to do. So what I wanted to be able to do is recommend to my fellow citizens the most powerful things we can do that we actually have a chance of achieving. I didn't want to say, oh, theoretically, if we had this constitutional amendment or this perfect candidate, things would be different. I wanted to say, here's what is powerful and here's what we can really do. And that comes down to two things. And they combine in a package. And the package I call Final Five voting. And essentially, it's a new way of voting because we need to change the way people get elected, which is to say the way they get and keep their jobs, so that the connection is between solving problems that benefit the public at large and keeping your job. And that's not the current connection. And here's what we have to do. One, as you just mentioned, let's get rid of party-controlled primaries. Because right now, when you vote in the Democrat primary or the Republican primary, so few people turn out, and they tend to be more ideological that they push both sides far apart. And the real problem is not what then those sides, quote, say to get elected. It's when they're in Washington, D.C., and we want them to work together and figure out a solution to our complex issues. They fundamentally can't, because if they make any compromise with this other demonized side, they're going to lose their next party primary. So it's like saying, it's like as if I said to you, oh, Pat, do your job really well, and then you're going to lose it. That would be crazy, but that's how we've designed our election system. So let's just get rid of that party primary problem, and we'll have one primary, non-partisan, meaning that everybody runs on the same ballot, Republicans, Democrats, Greens, Independents, Libertarians. And then the top 5 vote getters can advance to the general election. So now we won't just have one Republican and one Democrat in this, death fight. We'll have a diverse debate and a dynamic debate of 5 different visions and maybe 2 kinds of conservatism and more than one kind of liberal viewpoint. Then the second change we make is after these 5 debate between the primary and the general, in the general, let's figure out which one of those 5 has the greatest support of the most number of voters. And how we'll do that is using instant runoffs, which is to say, we get a chance then to rank our candidates. Oh, this is my favorite. I really want this person to win, all the way down to sort of my last choice, kind of like, oh, over my dead body, do I want so-and-so to win? And we use those choices to have an instant runoff when we count the votes, so that we'll end up finding out which one of those 5 candidates has over 50% support, true majority support. Because what we don't want to do is do this great job of having 5 candidates and then almost accidentally elect someone with only 21% of the vote if all the votes kind of split equally. We want to keep driving towards these runoffs so we have a consensus decision. When we do these two things, open top 5 primaries plus instant runoffs, or what we also call ranked choice voting in the general election, we now can expect results from Washington, D.C., and we can expect accountability, which is to say, for the first time, if our representatives aren't getting things done, they can expect new competition. Right now, we see that no matter how dissatisfied people are, we continue to have only the same 2 choices all the time. So it's this vibrant competition that now creates what I found, and I mentioned at the beginning, in business. If you serve your customers, you do well. If you innovate, you do well. If you solve problems, you do well. And now we'll have that same healthy competitive dynamic in politics. And it's really resonating with so many people who are, even though they may go and vote and they may say, oh, I'm happy my candidate won, they still understand that the likelihood we're really going to get stuff done in the existing system is small.
So let's talk about that then, because these do sound like very good ideas in terms of moving towards a more functioning democracy, a more perfect union, if you will. But I suppose if they're just ideas that doesn't get anything done, they have to be put into practice. So can you tell us a little bit about how you are actually looking to put these ideas into practice?
Yeah, you know what? Well, I'm going to reach over here and grab something. Okay, this is my pocket constitution, and you know, there's a reason it's called the pocket constitution. It's so small, it's very short. What's not in here is let's have party-controlled primaries. What's not in here is let's, you know, let the person with the most votes win, even if they don't have a majority. What is in here is Article 1, which says every state makes the rule of how their senators and congresspeople in Washington, D.C. are elected. So what's amazing is that we don't need a constitutional amendment to change these rules. They've just been made up, you know, over time. And now that we've realized how unhelpful they are, we can change them. And in Wisconsin, how we do that is that the legislature has to pass a law and then the governor signs it. And in other states, they can certainly do that as well. And then some states can also have a ballot initiative where the citizens can vote for it. So I work around the country with people who want to make these changes in their state, but I also spend a lot of time focused in, you know, my state where I grew up and had my business. And we have a really great movement of people across the ideological spectrum who don't agree on candidates and policy, but have come together to agree that the current system doesn't help either side and certainly doesn't help the people. And so we're working together to say, let's change these rules and put final 5 voting in Wisconsin. And we're actually going to introduce a bill. I say we. It's not the we, it is now our legislators. So we have sponsors in the Senate, the state Senate and the state assembly who will introduce a bill in 2021 to put final 5 voting in place in Wisconsin. It's so exciting. And in this time, this is what's so interesting, in this time where everybody thinks everything is divided, we're getting extraordinary agreement in Wisconsin. In fact, I don't know if you ever saw it, but in May of this year, when there was a lot of talk in Wisconsin about all these fights between Democrats and Republicans in Madison, State Senator Dale Kuinga, a Republican, and State Assembly person Danny Reamer, a Democrat, published a joint op-ed in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel talking about everything they agreed on and how they've come together to be the lead sponsors on this legislation that we'll have in 2021. It's, candidly, it's inspirational to me.
So should we expect to be seeing you testify in the legislature next year?
Oh, you know, if they want me to testify, I'll testify. But the good thing is they probably won't need me, meaning there are so many people already who are on board with this. Business leaders, community leaders, people in the Milwaukee metro area, Madison, and also increasingly out of state. And what's really cool also is that Mike Gallagher, Representative Mike Gallagher, who serves in Congress now, is one of our leading proponents for this change. So I would love to see him testify, right? Because he'd be saying, hey, go ahead, change the rules on how I get elected. Because I live in Congress, and I'm sort of speaking for him now because I've heard him describe this, and I think that we in Congress could get a lot more done if people came here elected with these incentives in mind, instead of if people come the way they come now, which is forced to be on one side, of these two warring teams, and have to sort of have lockstep ideology to, these one of two choices. And so I think his testimony would be amazing. And now, just recently, I think you recently interviewed former Congressman Reed Ribble, a Republican from Wisconsin, and he has just joined our advisory board with also a similar message, which is that the current system is not going to get this done. And we have to take our eyes off of candidates. I'm not saying they're not important. I'm saying that candidates, great candidates on top of this system, will have a ceiling on what they're ever going to get done for us.
Katherine, thank you so much for taking the time to join us this week.
Well, thank you, Pat, for having me. I hope maybe we'll talk again, because this is going to, unfold over time, and there's a lot of people engaged. So I really appreciate having the opportunity to discuss it with you.
Now, that was a surface level look at your work, but if you're interested in learning more, you can check out Katherine's most recent work, The Politics Industry: How Political Innovation Can Break Partisan Gridlock and Save Our Democracy. Until next week, I'm Pat Pope-Levy. Thanks for tuning in.